Hello everyone, thank you very much for tuning in one more time to our little audio show here. This is Norm, cartoonist, writer, visionary, Wile E. Coyote level super genius. As I record this today, it is very gray and rainy, as it has been here for the last 4 days, and honestly, it's kinda wearing on me. In fact, the last week or so has been kind of on the stressful side, among other things dealing with a minor household crisis that has ultimately worked out, but because I am at my core as neurotic as a chihuahua, it managed to utterly blow my concentration anyway. So here we are now, picking up the pieces of the week after the big Xbox Game Showcase and, of course, Starfield Direct. The tsunami has crashed, the tide has rolled back out, and now we are left with naught but the occasional scrap of game information peppered along the desolate beach of the internet, bloated, rotting, and drying out in the sun. Personally, I find it a little suspicious that pretty much the entirety of the Summer Games Fest takes place before summer actually starts. What are they hiding? But it is summer now, despite weather to the contrary, and despite the dearth of viable gaming options until about the beginning of the fall, I am in no mood to push the calendar forward as yet, mostly because I am very, very old. So until then, you will find me outside, battered in sunscreen, wearing short shorts, sandals, and a very large sun hat, which will hopefully keep off some of this very, very cold rain that we're getting. Actually, I do have some fairly ambitious plans for a large-scale summer project, which I am to some extent working on right now, but because I am not 100% sure I'm actually going to be able to pull it off, probably best not to mention anything publicly as yet. If it does work, it'll be cool. Anyway, without a lot of video game news to fall back on right now, we are going to have to resort to actual news, which is generally a lot more depressing, with exceptions. Looking at you, Redfall. Probably the big news of the past week was the OceanGate tourist submarine tragedy, which, rotten situation all around there. And because this story does involve the, quite frankly, the horrible, violent deaths of some real, actual people, we're not going to dwell on it. But there was one aspect that is relevant to our interest here, and that is the fact that early on in the news cycle, a lot was made about the fact that the submarine's navigation system relied on an off-the-shelf Logitech game controller. Now, a lot of people on the internet, a lot of people on the YouTubes, on the Twitters saying, well, of course, what do you expect when you have your submarine being run by the cheap, sticky, extra controller that you have under the table in case your cousin comes over for two-player? But now that the facts in the case are coming out and we see what's actually happened, and even though Logitech controllers are reasonably priced, and even though Logitech does not engineer the controllers specifically for submarine use, although their documentation does not specifically say that they are not for submarine use, when all was said and done, we have discovered that the Logitech controller was not, in fact, to blame. The tragedy came about because of structural deficiencies on the submarine itself, and to the best of anyone's knowledge, the Logitech controller carried out its duties admirably. With that said, it's probably still a bit of a red flag if you step inside a retrofitted industrial propane tank headed for the ocean floor and navigated by game equipment, but as my friend Sarah noted, at least it wasn't a Mad Catz. All the buttons popping off and the C stick stuck in the down position and the turbo button stuck on. That's some trauma. Okay, but enough of that. Let's discuss people braving hostile environments in pressurized metal tubes in a happier context, with a closer look at the Starfield Direct presentation. Now, I know I mentioned the Starfield Direct in the last video as part of the Xbox Game Showcase, but as Xbox themselves believed it fit to give Starfield almost an equal portion of the entire airtime, I'm going to do the same. Starfield is hands down pretty much my number one anticipated game this year. Bethesda makes a big deal of the fact that their games are perennial favorites that years, even decades out from release, people are still playing actively, not like pick up, get your dose of nostalgia, then put back down. People are actively playing games like Skyrim, which at this point is going on, like 13 years? Well, I'm one of those guys who is still playing it. That, Fallout 4, sort of Morrowind, although, yeah, that one is a turn-on feel nostalgic, turn it back off. But the Bethesda formula really works for me, a person who gets bored pretty fast with one mode of gameplay. It's true that because of this, the Bethesda games do tend to suffer a bit from the jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none syndrome, where the dozens of different gameplay systems grafted onto each other aren't necessarily the most polished or feature-rich, but there's always something different to do or different to see, and because their games are, at their heart, pretty much just simulated places to exist in, it does a great deal towards eliminating gaming fatigue, where in other games where you would be hacking and slashing for one level, then the next level comes up and you're hacking and slashing, then the next level comes up and you're hacking and slashing. Don't get me wrong, there are some really great games that are based around hacking and slashing, and infinitely more polished than the gameplay in like the Elder Scrolls, but they don't have the staying power. So yeah, the Starfield Direct. 40 minutes of people talking about Starfield. And if that seems self-indulgent, honestly, I wish more games would do that. Particularly large-scale games that do have a lot to offer. I've said it before, but for me at least, the modern wave of game trailers that are a minute long and consist of nothing but combat just don't get much of a reaction from me anymore. In this era, if your game does have some unique systems, you owe it to yourself to get that information out of there. Plus, I will say in Starfield's particular case, they needed this 40-minute show because the show in the E3-ish 2022 presentation, it was something on the scale of like 10 to 15 minutes. And while people like me who are clearly kind of Bethesda fanboys, we responded to it well enough because we could sort of see past the jank and see what they were aiming for gameplay-wise. For the vast majority of gamers, a lot of them who probably have not picked up a Bethesda game before. Again, I hate confronting the fact that I am old, but the last single-player game they made was Fallout 4 back in 2015. So yeah, for an 8-year gap, and that means that the current crop of teenagers probably have no idea what they're getting into. Some of the Bethesda formula really just has to kind of be laid out for them. And that is in large part what the early portions of this presentation did. In fact, the first 2 to 3 minutes of the presentation was more or less just a recap of what they were going over in the early boring part of the 2022 presentation, where we showed them walking around on a planet's surface, one quick flash of the mining laser, some admittedly improved space combat, but after that they started doing the real presentation, going into the details of the world, showing off, smart move was showing off the food, as dumb as that sounds. I've actually watched the presentation several times with different people reacting to it, and the food got a surprisingly large amount of oohs and ahs, and part of the big reason for that, it's something other games don't do. Although I wish they would. In particular, the Yakuza series could benefit from fully rendered 3D meals, given that they do feature a surprisingly large amount of restaurants and eateries, and eating is a game mechanic there. I'm getting off topic, but pass that one up the line to Sega. But this moment in the Direct started off a deep dive into a lot of the little systems, a lot of the details, and then the big systems, but all the things that essentially make a Bethesda game a Bethesda game. I can't tell you how many times watching the reactions, they would mention features that were quite literally in other Bethesda games, and the reactors would kind of go wild on them. Like at the beginning where Todd Howard said that Vasco, the robot companion, would be able to actually say your name, and in the clip Vasco says, "Hello, Captain Howard." That's not new, that was from Fallout 4 back in 2015. But because it is a unique feature, because other games don't do it, it absolutely warranted a mention, and it got a great reaction. Now, I am not going to go shot by shot on the reaction here. In fact, I'm going to do a pretty quick once-over on it because, well, not to scare you off, but like I said, Starfield is my most anticipated game, so you're probably going to get more of me talking about it, especially as we get closer to the actual release. So, just to pick out some highlights, one of the big things that I noticed about this Direct, a lot of people noticed it about the Direct, was that the lighting was much improved, and not just the lighting, but the colors. Whoever's decision it was for the 2022 presentation to be presented entirely in shades of mud, that did not go over well, but this one was very vivid. It had blues, reds, I realize I'm listing off primary colors like they're a feature on a box, but quite frankly, in a lot of situations, vivid colors are kind of a rarity in action games now. So yeah, the lighting, much improved, colors, much improved. In fact, I saw a lot of people saying that the character models had really improved over the last presentation, and I'm not certain that the character models changed at all, but the lighting certainly did. Speaking of the character models, the facial animation, relying as it does on automatic animation synced to the voice audio files, they still look pretty robotic. But quite frankly, I have had Whiterun guards swimming past me on dry land. It's going to take a lot more than that to dampen my enthusiasm for a Bethesda game. Okay, what else? Just a couple more things here because we are kind of running out of time and I don't want to bore you off the podcast. But a closer look at the different cities they had. Another very smart move because one thing it really did show was the diversity of the environments there. The last one was very planet focused with only a glimpse or two of the actual human settlements, and this one went a lot more in depth on the humans themselves. And that, I mean, for a game where a lot of the concern coming out of the fan base is on the reliance on procedural content, it was a very smart idea to lean in on the handcrafted human elements. So the fact that you got to see the utopian United Colonies world, New Atlantis, had that kind of futuristic look, and then across the galaxy to Aquila City, the space western town, and then down to the cyberpunk city. It did a really good job of showing you places that you would want to see more of, I should say. This one, much more than the last presentation, really sold the idea, the potential of the game, where you actually do want to jump into it at this point. I guess that's really the crux of what I'm zeroing in on talking about this right now, is how much better this presentation was than the one in 2022. Because watching that one, like looking back on it right now, you almost got the feeling that Todd Howard had never played No Man's Sky, because it was almost this litany of features that, yeah, they're neat, but they were from No Man's Sky, and like even their big showstopper announcement at the bottom was borrowed from No Man's Sky, the 1,000 planets. And of course, we who played Bethesda games know that, yeah, that's not going to be the entire thing. There's going to be a lot more of a Bethesda game on top of that, but for the general gaming populace, that announcement was met with pretty much crickets. This presentation, on the other hand, I don't know if they got a special consultant for it, whatnot, but this one hit all the right notes. It was there to build hype, show you what this game does that no other game does, and it worked. For me, at least. Your mileage may vary if you're a hater. Anyway, we've gone long enough here. I am not going to take up any more of your time talking about Starfield today. I will be taking up more of your time talking about Starfield later. But for now, let's close off this episode with a couple more interesting facts. First, because the planet Mars is featured in Starfield, did you know that on Mars, sunsets are blue? Yes, while here on Earth, the particles in the atmosphere filter out the blue light and leave us with a mostly red-orange sunset, different particles in the atmosphere of Mars filter out different spectrums of light, leaving only blue. And because Starfield did say that they were going to be relying on NASA data for the way the planets are modeled, I would be interested to see if we do actually get blue sunsets in-game. If not, this is your 2-month notice. Get on that, you guys. Don't want the science community laughing at you. Finally, for our last fact, did you know that a complete NASA spacesuit costs $12 million to build? And do you know why the NASA suit costs $12 million to build? It's because they were manufactured back in the 1970s. If you tried to build them now, they would be around $150 million. But here's the thing, we haven't. All of the spacesuits that we currently have were manufactured in the 70s. We started with about 18 full spacesuits, and now, according to the article I'm reading, which was back in 2021, we are down to 4 spacesuits. That's not a lot of spacesuits, and it does not inspire confidence in whoever's going to be next wearing those things because, 1, obviously they're 40 years old, 2, by sheer odds, somebody has peed in there and probably multiple times. So if nothing else, I hope that the release of Starfield will kick our spacesuit manufacturing division back into gear, hopefully innovating and creating a new generation of spacesuits with better technology and more efficient manufacturing processes, and we can finally put those last 4 NASA suits out to pasture. Hopefully somebody will hose them out real good before they end up at the yard sale. Anyway, that is all we have for you today. Thank you very much for joining and staying all the way to the very end with me. If you enjoyed today's show, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. If you want to take a more active part in pushing these things out, you can join our Patreon. See comics before anybody else does. Otherwise, thanks again. Once again, this is Norm, and I will see you all next time. Y'all take care.
Like the video gamers? We have more such wonders to show you, and all you have to do is subscribe and hit the notifications button.
I mean, you don't have to.
Also consider becoming a patron by following the link to our Patreon page, where we turn your cash into videos, comics, and games using the darkest of dark magics.
But mostly just cash.